Hello and welcome to SFHA's Managing Voids webinar. I'm Lorna Wilson, the Head of Policy and Innovation at SFHA, and I'm delighted to welcome you along to our webinar today. A warm welcome from the whole team here. For those who are joining us for the first time, it's great to have you with us. And as always, the recording of this webinar will be available on our website, along with any slides from the session today. So before I pass over to our speakers for today, just a few housekeeping announcements from me. So attendees don't have audio enabled for the webinar. However, we're very keen for any questions that you have. So at the bottom of your screen, there's a panel that says Q&A. So if you click on the Q&A function at any time on the control panel and type in your question, I'll keep an eye on the questions and we'll ask those questions of the speakers afterwards. So after they've spoken, so we'll have a Q&A session after the presentations. You'll also notice on the panel there's a chat function. You can use this to share any observations or thoughts with other attendees, but please don't use it for questions. So we'll use the Q&A for questions, please. So really encourage you to do that and get involved throughout the session. So that's everything from me. And so nothing more for me to say just now other than to say I hope you enjoy the session, and I'll introduce the speakers. So we've got two great speakers today. We've got Michael Torno from Public Health Scotland and Katie Tabner from COSLA. And I'm going to invite Michael first of all to kick us off on the webinar. So over to you, Michael. Michael, can I interrupt you just a moment, please? I think your mic's on mute. If you're able to unmute, that would be great. So we can't hear you, and then start again. That'd be great.
Sorry, that should be it now.
Thank you.
So nobody heard any of that. Okay. Good morning. Good afternoon, rather. My name's Michael Torno. I'm a Senior Health Improvement Officer at Public Health Scotland. I'm glad to be here this afternoon to briefly discuss a resource that Public Health Scotland and the Association of Local Authority Chief Housing Officers, ALACO, have currently published. Tony Kane from ALACO was hopefully going to be speaking alongside me today, but unfortunately has had to give his apologies. It's a very hard act to follow, so I'll do my best. We have put together a resource which is called Safe Working in Voids during COVID-19, frequently asked questions and advice. And we put this together because ALACO raised that many local authorities and RSL were really struggling with being able to continue normal letting of properties because of quite understandable concerns about how to make them safe since the COVID-19 outbreak. And obviously because of that, that there's a situation developing where people in housing need are potentially not being able to move into properties as quickly as anybody would like. So we focused on developing this resource to try and help people find solutions to the concerns about COVID-19 what we looked at was the process that most housing providers seem to go through, making a void property ready to be let to a new tenant. We published the resource, which is 14 questions with corresponding answers. It's published on the ARACO website, and SFHA, I think, have sent the link out in advance this morning. It covers several topics. So first of all, it looks at how to make the property safe for a cleaner to work in. So what we advise is it's left for 72 hours, and then a cleaner, it's then safe for it to be cleaned using disinfectant and detergent, with particular attention paid to frequently touched areas. The resource talks about what sorts of household product can be used on different surfaces. It looks at both unfurnished and furnished properties. And in the case of furniture, it talks about how to make furniture safe to use. And it also covers it covers the topic of repair staff being able to go in once the property has been cleaned and has been left for 72 hours. It's then safe for repair staff to work in. We also, as you understandably, we cover the topic of personal protective equipment and what equipment cleaners need, what would be safe for repair staff to use, and it gives some very brief advice, which, if it's followed, means that the property should be safe and can be put back into use as quickly as possible. The advice is based on Health Protection Scotland guidance, which has been updated several times since the COVID outbreak, but it's based on two key bits of guidance that they have published, one of which concerned residential settings, and the other concerned non-healthcare settings. So I think that's all I have to say. I'll hand back to Laura.
Thanks, Michael. That's great. So that gives us a good overview of what's covered in the resource for landlords. So I'd encourage you, if you've got any questions or thoughts at any point, to use the Q&A, and we'll pick them up after we've heard from Katie Tabner from COSLA. So I'll invite Katie to share her thoughts on this topic with us. Katie. Michael, we have a question here around, do we know how many RSLs are letting houses just now?
I don't personally know the number of RSLs that we're doing. That's something maybe you'd have, SFHA, more knowledge about. In terms of local authorities, I'm aware that Aberdeenshire Council have started or are about to start reletting properties. I'm not aware of any other local authorities. Unfortunately, this is where Tony would come in.
Yeah, I think from the Housing Association perspective, and we've got many with us just now who can maybe share what they're doing, but many housing associations are looking at letting houses just now in a number of different ways. And yeah, I think in the early stages, there were a lot of empty property. There's a lot of partnership working with local authorities in terms of empty properties being used for temporary accommodation. Some of those have been transferred to permanent, and other housing associations are looking at contactless letting processes and using a variety of, I suppose, innovations and ideas to kind of keep the system moving, including some relaxation in terms of timescales. So if a tenant isn't able to move into the house immediately, having some flexibility around that as well, supporting tenants with practical things as much as possible in terms of things like furniture or white goods. And so we've got a comment here that Viewpoint is relating hospital discharge or medical transfer, so people coming from hospitals going into their homes. And we've got another comment here around we have water, hygiene, disinfection works which need to be carried out. They've been lying for a few months. Should this be done at the same time as cleaning or before cleaning? I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, Michael, where there's water, hygiene, disinfection works, so specific works needing done. Should they be done prior to the cleaning that's included in the guidance?
Yeah, the process that we were advised by a LACO that tends to be followed is that the property is cleaned first of all, and then repair works happen. The reason I probably wouldn't advise that is what we are advising happens in the first instance is the property is left alone. It's left vacant for 72 hours before cleaner goes in and does any cleaning. And that's because we know after 72 hours, the risk of COVID being adhering to any surface is very, very low. So we suggest that in the first instance so that people, anybody going into the property, it's as safe as they can be.
We did have a question around the 72-hour period where that timescale came from. So is that based on the evidence around the virus itself?
Yes, it's based on Public Health Scotland guidance that's been used throughout the UK.
And a few examples from landlords at Glasgow West have carried out 2 homeless lets using social distancing measures, and Link have just started relets and concentrating on homelessness for now. And I've got another comment here around being able to let the property, but the services that are available are limited, and this can affect the ability of the tenant settling into the property. So it's kind of looking at I suppose the whole system or the whole experience for the tenant. It's not just about letting the property, it's around what's their experience going to be when they move into the home and are able to settle on the property as well. So thinking about the whole service offer and around. And somebody's asked if we can pass on the link to NHS COVID-19 procedures. Not sure what ones in particular. Is that the Health Protection Scotland?
It's probably, yes, they're two bits of guidance that we've drawn upon, and the links to that are in the introduction to the question and answers resource that you've sent the link around to.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Michael.
No problem.
Somebody's asked around carrying out void repairs. So planning to carry out void repairs, then leave the property for 72 hours before cleaning. And do we need to leave it a further 72 hours before viewing?
No, No,
Right.
what the guidance says is that after the initial 72 hours and the cleaning, the property can then either be repaired, or it can be, if it doesn't need to be repaired, it can then be let out. There's not another 72 hours that are needed.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. That's good clarification. And Northview are sharing that they're starting to let properties as well. And they're interested in how other organisations are managing the sign-up process. So yes, we've had quite a lot of inquiries about that. So SFHE is looking at what we can do in terms of supporting our members with that. So some of that will be about just creating a space for sharing practice and what's working and what's not working as well. But also opportunity to have a kind of structured way of testing different approaches across different organisations and sharing the learning. So that's something that we'll be working with you on. If you're interested in finding more out about that, certainly get in touch with the team, get in touch with myself or the SFHE team after the webinar today. So letting homes is one of the challenges. It's also it's a big priority in terms of preventing homelessness. There are lots of people in temporary accommodation just now who are in very insecure accommodation. So what we want to do is get people into permanent homes and keep the system moving in a safe way, obviously. So we've got another question here around process. Normally our first step would be to ensure gas safety is checked before contractors would do the cleaning, and leaving 72 hours means that the gas has not been checked and capped for this period. So you're saying the cleaning has to take place first before the gas safety checks? Is that included in the rules?
Well, what we were advised by Alaco was that the cleaning should probably take place first. That said, if the property is left for 72 hours, it should be at very, very little, there should be very, very little risk to anybody going in. Ideally, cleaning should happen first. But I suppose if there's a concern about gas safety, then that needs to be considered, and the organisation involved, should really take decisions and actions, through a risk assessment. We know that the Scottish Government have published advice around gas safety check, I think.
Yeah. Okay. And just another point of clarification, if the property has been lying empty for a period before the keys go to the landlord, is there still the 72 hours wait? So if we know the property's been empty for a period of time, do we still have, is the guidance still to wait for 72 hours before going in and restarting the work?
If you know that the property's been vacant for 72 hours, then that's okay. In terms of, whether whether you have any knowledge about the previous occupant, whether they had, there's definitely been a case of COVID in the flat, in the property. That then would make you want to carry out some sort of assessment about how that property should be cleaned. So I mean, we set out in the advice how the property should be cleaned, but there are considerations that organisations need to make themselves about for example, the level of PPE that cleaners might want to wear.
Okay, that's good. So we've got some landlords just sharing practice in terms of the letting process, leaving paperwork in the house for to be signed, and yes, and then collecting a plastic bag and leaving for 72 hours, using apps, electronic lease signing as well, and using phones for communication. Somebody's asking about thoughts around the use of key safe boxes and passing of keys to contractors. These are all useful practical things. Scanning of signatures on application form, and discussing tenancy conditions on the phone.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a question here around the void assessment, at what point that should be carried out. So I guess that's in terms of the standard of the property, whether any work's needing required. Should that be carried out before or after the cleaning?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch the question.
Oh, sorry. When we're assessing an empty property for any work needing done, should the cleaning be done before that?
Ideally, the
property should be cleaned first. Yes,
ideally cleaning to be done first, and then the property is definitely safe for repair staff to be using.
Okay. Okay, I think Katie's managed to rejoin us, which, hello Katie, glad that you've made it. So I think we'll hand over to you now, Katie, and then we can pick up any, so I've got a number of questions still there, but we can pick up any remaining questions once we've heard from you.
No problem.
Okay?
Thank you.
So I'll hand over to Katie, thanks.
Thanks, Lorna. Thanks, Michael. Apologies for that. My computer decided to freeze and all of my fantastic notes have gone with it. So you'll have to bear with me. I will be happy to go into detail and answer questions. So I just wanted to talk a little bit around a joint piece of not guidance, but advice and information for the housing sector. This was developed in partnership between COSLA and Scottish Government, but it was also developed with the 3 housing resilience COVID groups. So that included the private rented sector, the social landlords and local authorities. The guidance came about because very early on in the COVID response, it emerged that the pause on void processing was creating significant blockages within the housing system, and that was placing those who are presenting as homeless, who are some of our most vulnerable members of our communities, at particular risk. And we did see that the efforts to bring rough sleepers in off the streets and to put them into hotel accommodation, and we've also seen presentations from those with no recourse to public funds, migrants, refugee, asylum seekers, and also those fleeing domestic abuse. So we were aware that whilst the processing of voids had stopped, it was not anticipated that there wouldn't be an increase in presentations during this time, as those individuals who are at risk needed to self-isolate and potentially move out of their homes where they were at risk. We were also aware that hidden homelessness and those who may be sofa surfing or in kind of insecure accommodation, the lockdown conditions would exacerbate their situations, and that would also lead to an increase in homelessness presentations. So across the housing sector, there was the conversation for a need for guidance around how we can safely proceed with void processing, acknowledging that homelessness and the allocation of moving into settled or temporary accommodation would count as an exceptional circumstance within the COVID legislation that was brought in. The guidance kind of brought together the views of the 3 different resilience groups, and the kind of an overarching aim of the guidance was to ensure that there was agreement and consensus that this required a whole housing sector response, and it wasn't necessarily just local authorities or just housing associations. We all needed to work together to be able to address the mounting challenge around homelessness and kind of moving people into more settled forms of accommodation during the crisis. So to kind of look at the guidance, I think it's important to also recognise that at no point do we think that void processing is the only answer to the crisis around homelessness. We're also recognising that there's interlinked challenges here. That also includes safe working conditions for workforce, ensuring that new utility connections can be put in place for empty homes, ensuring that repairs can be carried out safely, ensuring that furniture can be brought in and accessed in unfurnished units, and also that removal firms can be linked into this process. So we recognise that you know, it's not ideal to have lots of empty homes sitting when we have people in temporary accommodation, but we also know that this is a bigger conversation with utility companies, waste removal, recycling, and those conversations have been ongoing through the work of the Resilience Group. So to kind of look at the guidance and just to kind of quickly cover what's included, one of the kind of overarching ambitions was to bring together the statutory duties that existed on landlords already, and that was developed in collaboration across those resilience groups. And then also bringing the new public health measures that have come in response to COVID. So the attempt was to try and bring those together and see how we could continue to keep the sector running throughout the period. What the guidance does is it talks about how the provision of accommodation can be made safely. So looking at the different roles of different parts of the sector, so the private sector, housing associations, and also local authorities. And then it looks at practical considerations around assessing condition and repair. And when I came back into the webinar, I noticed that this was a conversation that was ongoing anyway. And it also draws on some of the guidance from the Q&A around cleanliness and sanitation, talking about the 72 hours. It also then looks at the allocations process. So how can contactless lettings, for instance, be brought in? What are the practical considerations in terms of ensuring tenants can be contacted, tenants can sign their lease, tenants can have all of the services that they would normally have in the new normal where we're all working remotely and working with safe social distancing as well. The guidance also looks at specific considerations around homelessness presentations. So it looks at tenant support and wellbeing, and it tries to link in with national programs for support around ensuring tenants have access to food parcels, if tenants need to self-isolate, and also prescription drop-offs, and links into local third sector networks, because these were all issues that were very much present at the time. Also ensuring that assuming tenants were going into properties and they wouldn't have any possessions with them, especially if they've been homeless or left sleeping, and ensuring that there was the provision of a basics pack that people could have in their homes whilst they were self-isolating as well. The guidance also links to other resources and talks about the activity across the sector, and it also highlights some examples that were gathered through those resilience groups and quite helpfully provided by members, and you can see there in terms of the remote working and also the contactless letting. And I think that it's since the guidance has been issued, I think it's also really important to just highlight the fact that this is still a very live issue. We are in conversations very regularly with partners across the housing sector in terms of the challenges of getting empty properties back into use at a time when we're still having to take social distancing measures and ensure the safety of workforce. So what I'd be really keen to hear from alongside questions is if anybody has currently through their own organisations looking at, they may have paused voids or paused lettings, and they're now looking to bring that back into stream, so they're now looking to get that back up and running. I'd like to kind of hear about any of those challenges so that we can start to feed that back to the national work that I mentioned at the beginning, which is trying to link in some of the other challenges that are associated with bringing empty properties back into use. So I welcome lots of questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. That's great. So, so some of you may have seen the guidance that Katie's referring to. So I think be interested to hear comments or questions on that itself, how useful it's been. If you've not seen it yet, then we'll be sharing that with you after the webinar. You may also have seen the guidance that Michael talked about. And again, any questions and thoughts on that are useful. And Katie, as well as questions for Katie and Michael, this is an opportunity to share your kind of current challenges or issues just now, because these are the sorts of things, these are the things that we need to address and work with you to support you through. So, so I've got a question here which talks about the guidance which Katie's referred to, and it talks about using gloves as part of a checklist for sign-ups, which was an example provided by the Institute of Housing and based on a Welsh housing association. So the question is, should gloves be worn given cross-contamination risks, or should it simply be washing hands after the process, and any items such as pens or any items that are being used? So I suppose that's a question for both of you. I don't know, Michael or Katie, if you've got any thoughts on that, the use of gloves during the allocations or lettings process.
I mean, I'm happy to refer to Michael in terms of his expertise around kind of public health, but I think it's worth saying that a lot of the examples that we have were pulled together in the very early stages of the response to COVID. So some of the kind of measures that are included in those examples, for instance, the Welsh and the Chartered Institute for Housing, I would refer back to Michael to check the relevance of those today, actually.
Could you just repeat the question?
Sure, the question was about the use of gloves during the lettings process, whether that was included as an example in the Scottish Government guidance. It's just whether the thinking is still that staff should be using gloves through a lettings process.
It's probably appropriate. I mean, what we've advised is you know, any housing provider should take a risk assessment of the you know the situation that staff will be going into. So if there's you know, certainly if there is known to have previously been a case of somebody having COVID, somebody has died in the property, you know, wearing gloves would be appropriate. I would argue it depends as well as to whether the property has been left for the 72 hours and whether any cleaning has taken place. If it has been left for 72 hours and it's been cleaned, then you know, probably the use of gloves isn't needed.
Yeah. Okay. If I could just come back, I think the guidance, Michael, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the guidance generally states that unless there are kind of any fluids or anything that is highly contaminated, leaving for 72 hours would kill the virus on most surfaces. Is that correct, Michael?
That's correct.
So I would assume then just using judgment in terms of the previous occupants and also the risk that's present in the property, and that would need to be on a property by property basis.
Okay, that's good, thanks. So we've got a few people sharing practice around use of electronic signatures and working with contractors. What we'll do is we'll collate the examples that are here that you've participants here have shared, and we'll circulate that around everybody. We've got somebody here saying that they're struggling with utilities. So utilities is an issue in some cases, we do know that. Use Citrus for energy switches, but British Gas are refusing to attend vacant properties to resolve any meter issues. So that means that empty properties can't be brought into use. So I think, first of all, I don't know if Katie or Michael have got anything to add, any thoughts on that, and then if others have got any similar issues, even just to include it in the Q&A, just to get a sense of if that's a common issue across the people that are with us just now. So Katie, I don't know if you've got anything around utilities to say.
I think think it's a very live issue, and it's something that the Scottish Government are addressing in partnership with Ofgem. And I'm aware that Ofgem have set up a kind of a procedure to escalate this, and then they're looking to liaise with providers to ensure that it is a priority. I'd welcome anyone to send those details onto myself or Lorna, and then we could feed that back to the resilience groups. If it's a particular provider that's proving problematic, I can see British Gas is listed there. And there may be examples that we can draw on from across Scotland where British Gas have already been challenged on this, and we can use that almost as a case example to prioritise that. But I think it really feeds into that kind of complex interlinked challenges that we're facing in terms of we feel and we recognise that it is a priority, but it's getting other partners within the sector to see the priority. So for instance, utility companies to see that priority. But by all means, please escalate that and flag that up to myself and Lorna, and we can follow that up.
Okay, so another issue is around clearing of properties. So some outgoing tenants have been unable to clear properties due to recycling centres not being opened. So housing providers trying to be flexible, but it will have an effect on when repairs can start on empty properties. So that's kind of sharing another issue. So any sort of response on that?
Yeah, we've had a similar issue for councils as well. Sorry, Michael, very quickly. But I do believe, are we looking at an opening on the 1st of June for recycling centres now? So hopefully that's something that will be resolved, but it is a problem that we're aware of, and we've also experienced ourselves across councils as well.
Michael, do you want to add
No,
anything?
it was just Katie's already made the point. I was going to make just the understanding of the refuse and recycling centres will be reopening very soon. So I guess it's just it's another of these evolving live issues that you know, we just have to just watch.
Yeah. So just a couple of kind of thoughts or comments on the process itself, and how keys are passed to contractors, including the use of key safe boxes. So so I think the conversation in the chat here is useful in terms of some people sharing what they're doing around that. So certainly SFHA, we want to kind of, we'll collate what's been shared today, but I think it would be good, and we'll plan to do something around kind of bringing that together in terms of having a space where people can share examples of processes and protocols and what they're doing as well. Somebody's asking around the kind of legalities of paperwork being signed, and is there a definitive legal answer to whether we need to have paperwork being signed or whether that can be done digitally. We do know some landlords do their sign-ups digitally already, but that's certainly something that we could look at if people, if that would be of interest. So we do know that does happen, and across all other industries we don't sign any other paperwork, do we, in our lives? So why would we have to do that for tenancies, I guess? I don't know if that's something that's from a local authority perspective, Katie's been discussed.
I've not had those discussions as of yet, but I could find out. But I think it's probably just ensuring that whoever the tenant is that you're working with has access to the ability to be able to do that, and we're not excluding those who can't. I have seen suggestions of being able to mail them out in advance, and then leaving things an hour, like I think it was a day before posting or 2 days before posting to limit the spread of the virus. But I think if it is going down a digital and remote route, from a local authority perspective, it would always be to ensure that we can also still ensure equality of access for those who maybe don't have access to computers or the ability to put electronic signatures and things on.
So we've got a challenge here around people who are isolating or unwilling or unable to move, and this is something that a number of housing associations have talked to us about. And so how long can housing associations hold these, or landlords hold these properties for people that are isolating? So and we don't have clear guidance on that just now. So that is a real issue. So people that may potentially not be able to move for a number of months, for example. And so I think some landlords are certainly being flexible around timelines. If people can't get furniture, you know, it's going to take a bit of time for people to practically be able to move house. But if it's kind of an open-ended thing in terms of months, how do we deal with that? So I think that is a real issue. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it would probably be a few issues in terms of finding out the reasons why people weren't able to move, and if it's related to kind of concerns about cleanliness or concerns about the process being safe. Can the new guidance help in that way? In terms of a lot of the Q&A, the evidence there is designed to be public facing, so it's accessible, so people can be reassured about the processes that have been put into place to make moving safe. But I think at this point, I'm kind of very much wish Tony was here, who has a vast knowledge around the kind of legislative background in terms of an offer for this from a local authority perspective. But I know that may be different for housing associations, Lorna. So I'm not sure what your members have been doing.
Yeah, so I think what they're doing is their best with it. At the same time, obviously, if a property is empty for a length of time and the rent isn't coming in, there's obviously a kind of business issue there. And also the property is lying empty and not being used for that length of time. So I think that is a difficult one that we will need to deal with. So we've got somebody here saying that allocations and void repairs have been suspended. There's going to be a backlog. So there is an issue in terms of repair service starting up. There potentially will be a backlog, and how's that prioritised, and how this will affect the kind of overall picture there. So I think there is something about being transparent with tenants around that, and clearly communicating what the service is and how work's going to be prioritised.
Lorna, I was wondering as well, was there any, I'm sure I'm vaguely remembering a piece of guidance around the standards for accommodation in terms of if they're not life and limb repairs. Can you remember if there was any exemption in terms of the severity of the repair that was needed in terms of getting people into homes? If this would be something that could be followed up at a later date and tenants could still move in?
So is this since the COVID? So in terms of recent guidance, yes, around standards, yes. So I don't think there's certainly not any new guidance that's come out that I'm aware of around that, certainly not for housing associations. Another point here, an important point, is contractors have furloughed a lot of the voids teams. So it's about how that kind of, for housing associations that use contractors and don't have in-house teams. So there's contractual issues there around getting the teams back up and running. Yeah.
And I think as well, in terms of workforce returning, we've had conversations with trade unions, for instance, about the safety of working conditions as well. So if you do have external contractors, that will be a conversation that will be required. But the Q&A should be very useful in that sense, to be able to have those. I think it's probably worth recognising that we know that there will be a backlog. In the same way that we know that the voids processing, even by chipping away at it very slowly, we're not going to be operating anywhere near capacity, but it is much better to be in a position where we're slowly processing rather than having a huge backlog at the end of this, when lockdown lifts at the 30th of September, be it having that huge backlog. So it's really just about trying to just process even a small amount of these properties as and when is possible.
Yep, so a comment here on recycling centres. Potentially there could be an announcement on that shortly from Scottish Government. So that situation could change. I think the plan is for them to open, so we can wait and see what happens with that. So that might be one that might help with one of the issues that we've got, one of the challenges. And we've got some comments here around electronic tenancy agreements and legal advice there. So that's something that we'll certainly pick up at SFHE to see what we can do to support that. So UK government guidance and different landlords have got their own legal advice on that, but I think this is maybe one of these situations where it's quite useful to have one lot of legal advice for the sector rather than everybody having to go and do that individually and pay lawyers lots of money to do the same thing over and over. So, so that's certainly something that we can look at. And we've got Angus Housing Association saying that they are carrying out essential repairs. And then following up with routine repairs when the tenant's in. Yeah, so that is a change in terms of the process potentially.
Just to follow up on the issue about the recycling centres, there is a list published for some that are opening on the 1st of June. So some councils have come and listed that they'll be opening on the 1st of June. So that'll be next
okay,
week.
Next
Monday.
That's good. We've got one more question for clarification. I think this might be for you, Michael. So if a property has been empty for more than 72 hours, do we still need to clean the property before the staff member enters the property to carry out the inspection?
Yeah,
and would the cleaning not be better done as the last task after the repairs are carried out? So just that point about the kind of order of the process.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that the different housing providers perhaps have different processes. We put the advice together guided by Alaco's advice and by the Health Protection Scotland advice. And I suppose the benefit, I mean, I can understand logically why it might seem best that the cleaner goes in last so that the property is clean for the tenant. However, what we were advised is that the cleaner, after the 72 hours, the cleaner goes in and cleans all the sort of surfaces that are regularly touched, and in that way the property is then as safe as it can be for any repair operatives going in. The advice I was given when I queried the necessity for more cleaning afterwards is that generally when repairs are being done, there'll be, you know, if there's mess made, there'll be a bit of a sweep up done by the person doing the repair. I don't know if that's common practice because I'm not somebody that's working, you know, on a local authority housing organisation, but it was what we were advised.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
I think it's probably worth adding to that as well is I guess ensuring that the biggest risk that is presented in that process is when the property has been vacated and then needs to be cleaned, and just ensuring that staff that are going in to do that have adequate PPE in terms of any risk that's present in the property, and then the risk would be lessened over time as different operatives are going in, but ensuring, I guess, maybe potentially, again, that's an issue for housing associations to take themselves, but having a very quick wipe of those commonly touched surfaces or those areas where work has been ongoing. But I think there's different levels of risk, Michael. Again, I'm going to defer to you, but really we're talking about the risk here is any fluids or any spilled items, or where we know that somebody has had COVID, then really the risk is higher. Is that correct?
Yeah, the level of risk can vary depending on the surface. material, the humidity, whether it's the surface is in direct sunlight, that sort of thing. That's why, although 72 hours of a surface being left undisturbed, should mean that the risk is minimized. That's why we are advising that cleaners go in and with appropriate PPE and clean and disinfect areas that have been frequently touched, or where there's evidence of body fluid, blood, that sort of thing, that is decontaminated appropriately, and the advice that we published touches on those situations. Once that's happened, that then means that the risk is minimized for anybody going in thereafter to the property.
Okay, that's good, Michael. That kind of echoes a comment we've got here, which is around duty of care to staff. So property fully cleaned, disinfected before anyone enters. And somebody else is saying disinfect first and then do a final clean once the works have been completed. So we've got somebody here talking about kind of removal. How are people supposed to move if they need a man in a van? And will people, how will they get that service? So I think that is a fundamental point around how can people get their stuff moved. Any thoughts on that? Maybe that's one for you, Katie.
Yeah, I think it's something we don't necessarily have the answer for, really. We'd be looking at, from a council perspective, if there's any resource within the council to be able to conduct that with existing workforce, beyond letting, beyond contracting that out. But again, I think it's really difficult in terms of maintaining social distancing when moving properties, and then also the contamination of any properties going in, any furniture going into a property that has been moved. Moving property is quite heavy duty work, and the risk of contamination therefore does increase. But I think in the initial instance, again, maybe referring back to that 72-hour fail-safe, that if furniture can be moved in, referring back to that 72-hour period as a waiting time. But in terms of accessing the man with the van, that's a national problem, like it's a national issue that we're continually trying to work with, and that will again rely on external partners and other industries coming back on stream there.
Okay,
yeah,
that's great.
Reiterate that along with anybody working in any environment, that safety will be enhanced by there being, social distancing, by there being rigorous and routine hand hygiene. I think we need to accept that there are going to be questions raised that we don't necessarily have answers to.
Yep.
But that is the advice that's been given around all working environments, that there should be social distancing, but there should be good ventilation where possible, so windows left open, doors to small rooms or cupboards left open.
Okay,
so
that's great. So I think, yeah. Okay, so we're just about out of time. So thank you very much to Katie and Michael. We're continuing to work together across the partners on this and to provide support to our SFHE members. There'll be opportunities to learn and explore more ideas together. So please get in touch with us, or either of the speakers. Their contact details will be on our website. If you've got any suggestions for future topics, then please get in touch with us. So thanks again to Katie and Michael for their contributions. Thanks to you for joining us, and we look forward to welcome you to another webinar soon.
Thanks
Bye for now.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.